The oxygen tank made a soft hissing sound that nobody in the studio noticed at first. Grace Mitchell sat in the front row, her small fingers wrapped around the clear plastic tubing that fed life into her failing heart. At 11 years old, she weighed barely 60 pounds, her pale skin almost translucent under the bright family Feud studio lights. Steve Harvey was in full performance mode that Tuesday afternoon. The energy in the Atlanta studio was electric, as always. Two families stood at their podiums ready to battle for the $20,000 prize. The Mitchell family had driven 18 hours from rural Montana. Grace's parents had almost canceled the trip 3 times. Her condition had worsened significantly over the past month, and doctors weren't optimistic about finding a donor heart in time. But Grace had insisted on coming. This was her dream, she had told her parents through labored breaths. To see Steve Harvey in person, to be part of something bigger than hospital rooms and medical procedures. The portable oxygen concentrator hummed quietly beside her seat. Grace's mother, Sarah, kept checking the digital display every few minutes. The numbers had to stay above 90. The doctors had warned them. "Survey says," Steve announced with his signature enthusiasm. The Mitchell family was ahead by 40 points going into the final round. Grace clapped weakly, her thin arms barely making a sound. She had been saving her energy all day for this moment. The moment when her family might actually win something beautiful. The camera panned across the audience during a commercial break. Grace waved at the lens with a smile that could have powered the entire studio. Her eyes, though tired, sparkled with a joy that seemed impossible given her circumstances. Steve noticed her during the break. There was something about quiet kids that always drew his attention. He walked over to her section, his usual pre-show routine of connecting with the audience. "Hey there, beautiful," he said, kneeling down to her level. "You having fun?" Grace nodded, unable to speak without losing her breath. Her older brother Michael leaned over. "She's been looking forward to this for months, Mr. Harvey. She's your biggest fan." Steve's smile widened, but something in the boy's tone made him look more carefully at Grace. The oxygen tubing, the pale complexion, the way she seemed to be working just to stay upright. A recognition passed between them, unspoken but understood. "Well, you keep cheering for your family, okay?" Steve said gently. Grace managed a whispered okay that barely reached his ears. The cameras came back on. Steve returned to his position, but his eyes kept drifting to Grace throughout the next round. Something about her presence in that studio felt both precious and precarious. The fast money round began. Grace's father, Robert, went first and scored 168 points. The family needed only 32 more points to win the grand prize. Michael stepped up to the podium. At 19, he carried himself with the weight of someone who had grown up fast. His sister's illness had made him the man of the house before he was ready. "All right, Michael," Steve said, his voice carrying the usual game show energy. "You need 32 points to win $20,000 for your family. You ready?" Michael nodded, gripping the podium. In the audience, Grace leaned forward in her seat. The oxygen concentrator's display showed her levels were dropping slightly, but she didn't care. 20 seconds on the clock, Steve announced. "Name something people do when they're nervous." "Bite their nails," Michael answered quickly. "Good answer. Name something you might find in a hospital." "Doctors." "Name something that makes you feel better when you're sick." Michael paused for just a moment. "Medicine." "Name something children are afraid of." "The dark." "Final question, Michael. Name something that gives people hope." Behind the scenes, Grace made a decision that would change everything. The question hung in the air as Michael considered his answer. But before he could respond, a small voice called out from the audience, "Family." Grace had spoken the word with every bit of strength she had left. Her voice, though weak, carried across the studio with startling clarity. Steve stopped mid-breath. The cameras swung toward the audience. Michael turned from the podium, his eyes finding his sister immediately. Grace was trying to stand. The effort of speaking had taken something from her, but she was determined to be seen. Her mother reached out to steady her. alarm growing in her eyes. "I want to answer," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. The studio fell completely silent. Even the audience members who couldn't hear her words sensed something profound was happening. Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of episodes. He had seen every possible situation a game show could present. But this moment was beyond his experience, beyond any script or protocol. He set down his cards and walked toward Grace. Not the measured walk of a television host, but the urgent stride of a man who recognized something sacred unfolding. The production crew watched in stunned silence as their host abandoned the game entirely. "Sweetheart," Steve said, reaching Grace's row. "What did you want to say?" His voice had completely lost its performance quality. This was just Steve Harvey, the man, talking to a child who clearly had something important to share. Grace looked up at him with eyes that seemed far older than her 11 years. "Hope comes from family," she whispered, "and from people who care about you even when they don't know you." The words hit the studio like a physical force. In the control room, producers found themselves wiping their eyes. Camera operators continued filming, but many struggled to keep their shots steady. Steve knelt down in the aisle beside Grace's seat. "You're absolutely right," he said softly. "That's the best answer I've ever heard." But Grace wasn't finished. She reached into the small purse her mother had helped her pack. Her fingers, thin and pale, pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn from being handled repeatedly, the creases soft from countless readings. She held it out to Steve with trembling hands. "I wrote this," she said, her breathing becoming more labored, "in case I didn't get to meet you." Steve took the paper with the reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. He unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the careful handwriting. What he read there changed his expression completely. The cameras caught every emotion as it crossed his face: surprise, heartbreak, admiration, and something deeper. Grace had written, "Dear Mr. Harvey, I might not be here much longer, but I wanted you to know that you make people happy every day. If I don't make it, please tell kids like me that it's okay to be scared, but it's better to love everyone while you can. Thank you for making my family smile during the hardest time. Love, Grace." Steve's hands shook slightly as he finished reading. The studio was so quiet that the hum of Grace's oxygen concentrator seemed loud. 200 people held their breath, sensing they were witnessing something that transcended entertainment. He looked up at Grace, then at her family, then back at this remarkable child who had just taught him something about courage. "Grace," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "can I ask you something?" She nodded weakly. "What makes you so brave?" Grace smiled, the same radiant expression that had caught his attention earlier. "I'm not brave," she whispered. "I'm just grateful." The simplicity of her answer, the pure truth of it, broke something open in Steve Harvey's chest. He stood up slowly and did something unprecedented in television history. He addressed the entire studio directly, not as an entertainer but as a human being who had just been schooled in what really matters. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the studio, "this little girl just taught us something about hope, about family, about what it means to face impossible odds with grace." His voice caught on the last word, the unintended pun adding weight to the moment. "Grace," he continued, turning back to her, "I want to ask you something, and I want everyone here to hear your answer. If you could have anything in the world right now, what would it be?" Grace considered the question seriously. Around her, the studio waited. Her family watched with expressions of pride mixed with heartbreak. "I would want other kids like me to know they're not alone," she said finally. "And I would want the money my family might win to help them." Steve Harvey had made people laugh for decades, but in that moment he learned something about the difference between entertaining people and touching their souls. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Without explanation, he dialed a number while the cameras continued rolling. The conversation was brief, conducted in whispers that the microphones couldn't capture. When he finished the call, he looked back at Grace. "Sweetheart, I just talked to some friends of mine. Win or lose today, we're going to make sure kids like you get the help they need." But Grace's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The excitement, the emotional weight of the moment, the simple act of speaking had pushed her fragile system beyond its limits. Her mother noticed first, reaching for the oxygen concentrator's controls. "Grace?" Sarah's voice carried a panic that cut through the studio's reverent silence. Grace's eyes were starting to flutter. Her breathing, already labored, became irregular. Steve saw it happening and made another unprecedented decision. "Call the paramedics," he said clearly into his microphone. Right now, the studio erupted into controlled chaos. Medical personnel, who were always on standby for television tapings, rushed onto the set. But Steve never left Grace's side. As the medical team worked around him, he held her small hand and continued talking to her. "You stay with us, Grace. You hear me? You've got more kids to help, more hope to spread." Grace's eyes found his through the growing crowd of medical personnel. "Did we win?" she whispered. Steve looked toward the scoreboard, then back at her. "Baby girl," he said, tears now flowing freely down his face. "You won the moment you walked into this studio." The paramedics were preparing to move Grace to the ambulance. But before they lifted her onto the stretcher, she motioned for Steve to come close. He leaned down, bringing his ear close to her lips. What she whispered to him would remain between them forever, but it made Steve Harvey close his eyes and nod with understanding. As they carried Grace toward the exit, Steve did something that no one expected. He removed his suit jacket, the same navy blue jacket he wore for every taping, and gently placed it over her small form on the stretcher. "This jacket has been with me for every show," he told her. "Now it's going to keep you warm and remind you that you've got a whole studio family pulling for you." The ambulance doors closed, taking Grace away from the studio, but not from the hearts of everyone who had witnessed her courage. Steve stood in the parking lot until the emergency vehicle disappeared from sight. When he returned to the studio, he found 200 people still in their seats, still holding space for what had just happened. "Folks," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I've been doing television for 40 years. I thought I knew what this job was about." He paused, looking around at faces that had been forever changed by a little girl's Grace. "Grace Mitchell just showed us that our job isn't to entertain people. Our job is to love them." The Mitchell family won the $20,000 that day. But more importantly, Grace's story sparked something larger. Donations poured in from viewers across the country. A foundation was established in her name. Other families facing similar struggles found support and community they never knew existed. Grace spent 6 more weeks in the hospital after that day. Steve visited her whenever he was in Montana. He kept his promise about helping other kids, establishing programs that provided both financial and emotional support for families dealing with pediatric heart conditions. The jacket he had given her became a symbol of hope that traveled from child to child in the cardiac unit. Each young patient who wore it seemed to find strength they didn't know they possessed. Grace received her heart transplant on a snowy morning in December. The surgery was successful, but the recovery was long and uncertain. Through it all, she kept Steve's business card tucked under her pillow. On her 12th birthday, Grace was strong enough to return to the family Feud studio. She walked onto that stage without oxygen assistance, her cheeks pink with health, wearing a dress the same navy blue as Steve's jacket. Steve cried when he saw her, not the tears of sadness that had marked their first meeting, but tears of joy, of gratitude, of recognition that miracles sometimes come wrapped in small packages with big hearts. "You kept your promise," he told her. "You helped other kids." Grace smiled, the same radiant expression that had stopped a television show and started a movement. "We all kept our promises," she replied. "That's what families do." Today, Grace is 13 years old and thriving. Her heart beats strong and steady, a rhythm that echoes the hope she sparked in a television studio that day. Steve Harvey still keeps her letter in his dressing room. Before every taping, he reads her words about being grateful instead of brave. It reminds him why he does what he does, and who he's really entertaining. The oxygen concentrator from that day sits in the family Feud studio as a permanent reminder, not of illness or fragility, but of the strength that emerges when human beings choose to see each other's hearts instead of their circumstances. Because sometimes the most powerful moments happen when we stop performing and start caring. Sometimes a little girl with a failing heart can teach an entire world what it means to hope. And sometimes television becomes a window into the very best of who we can be. Grace's story proves that hope doesn't come from perfect health or ideal circumstances. Hope comes from family, from strangers who become friends, from the recognition that love shows up in the most unexpected places, even when wrapped in a game show host's jacket, even when spoken by someone who might not have tomorrow, even when it changes everything.